right, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. I know you just had a big community engagement on water, and I really appreciate the Department of Water Supply for doing that meeting out here. And I know he's going to have the results at some point of all that community engagement. But what we came out tonight to do is give everybody an update on the Water Authority, and then do some community engagement. And then we brought some expert speakers from the mainland they're gonna come and talk about some financing and decision making and bring that to you. So what I want to do first is, I'm Gina Young. I'm the director of the East Maui Water Authority. And I want to describe who we are. Sometimes we get confused with the name of our board. And we are the East Maui Water Authority. We are created by a voter initiative, a charter amendment that created us as an actual county department. So we are housed in the county of Maui. We're the county's newest department. And we have a dedicated mission that's written in the charter to manage East Maui water system and develop and implement a watershed plan. So tonight we're going to talk about both things, but we're also going to talk about what goes into a watershed plan. And we went out to last night and got a lot of good input too, which I'll share a little bit. So I just want to introduce who our staff is. We've gone from 2 to 4 in the past couple of weeks. Takes a while to get up and running. I have my secretary, Corey Vicens, who could just wave over there. And then we have our grant coordinator, who you met at the door, Leslie Tamarabuchi. And then we have our new information and education specialist, Serena Fukushima, too. So she's got a lot of experience in the watershed. She'll be helping with the watershed plan to get that up and going. We're going to have a water resource specialist come on. That position's been approved, and we need to go through the county system. And then we have some intern positions. And then we'll have 2 watershed workers. Council gave us 2 of those positions, so we can actually start getting in the watershed and doing some work. And that'll come in 2026. This is our board. It's an independent community board. The Ahavai o Maui Hikina is their name. Alan Arakawa did just resign, so we have that seat open. I want to just tell you the name. I'm sure you folks know. AHA is an assembly, Vai, water. And then Maui Hikina is the whole backside of Haleakala, and that's the watershed. So we're an independent community board that's 11 members. We have 2 upcountry representatives. I'm going to introduce Francis Quidazal, who Corey's gonna, right there we go. He's our board member. He's not only is he our Kula board member, he's our watershed expert, and he's actually worked on one of the first watershed plans for East Maui. So just really great to have that kind of professional experience on our board. And then we have an open seat right now, which is the Upcountry Ag representative seat. So anybody interested, I have some applications with me. It just requires that you live in that you do farming activity in the area where the water is used. And then we have a DHHL representative, which is our chair, Jonathan Scheuer. And then we have 8 members that are part of the watershed community, and they provide a lot of not just technical knowledge about the area and the watershed itself, but also about integration of Hawaiian knowledge, and they all bring a community perspective and feedback through. So they help us understand what's going on in the area. And part of what we're coming out today is to unite the watershed communities and the upcountry users. I know in the past we've been pitted against each other, but we are one community that's been directly affected by a lack of water. And we don't want to replace, we want to make sure we have an important perspective as we work towards local control. We don't want to replace the old system with the new system. We want to move to a mutually beneficial water resource management system that promotes equitable distribution and that really recognizes the benefits of meeting community needs and that sees the benefits in, I think, one of our expert speakers called it in creating a breadbasket in the Central Valley, and that's really food security. So we do see the water is an important, and when it comes to agriculture and feeding our people, as well as affordable housing production. You're going to hear some survey. I think many of you saw the survey that went out in the email, and you're going to hear some of the results of that. And we want to promote food security. We're also working with the Department of Agriculture on their food security plan. There's lots of food grown up here as well as on the east side. And then the surveys we're going to present in a minute. And we want to create island-wide economic benefits, which is both small and large-scale agriculture. The large-scale agriculture money recycles through our economy, and that's a really important purpose. It also creating long-term island water security. And if we look at what's going on in Lahaina with climate change, I think we can see some of the decisions that are needing to be made and priorities, and recognizing that we are an island and that we have capacity and limited resources. And we're also looking at long-term planning and funding components with this, where we can not only mitigate around climate change, but also there are opportunities with it. Some of the heavy episodic rains create storage opportunities. There's reservoirs that I know DWS is working on, and that really helps with long-term planning, lining of ditches and tunnels, upgrading infrastructure, and also data capture too, so we really understand what's going out in the watershed. And both the department and the board, we have a motto that here indeed is heaven reflected on earth. It's for all of us to protect, preserve, and sustain. It really recognizes that the water that comes down in the watershed is literally tears from heaven, and it's a natural resource that we really should be managing in a responsible, sustainable manner. So we have two missions that are laid out in the charter. One is to obtain control of the surface water and the system, and then the second is to develop and implement a watershed plan for the East Maui collection area. We're currently in discussions with Mahi Pono and EMI. We're in the early stages of it. We're working hard to reframe the discussion to bring in historical awareness and the need for equitable outcomes. Our discussions are led by Mayor Bisson, and also we're partners with DWS in these discussions. And as we develop more, have something to bring out to you, we do want to come back in and actually give you something. We don't want to have decisions made without getting input and surprise the community. So today, if there's an opportunity, if there's things you want to say, even though I don't have anything concrete to talk about, please feel free during the community engagement sessions to give what kind of input you'd like to see out of discussions with them. We're also working with the state system to better understand intergovernmental agreements and kind of how the legal side of the regulatory system is, and as well as the political side. And we're here, you know, I've come periodically to come talk to you so I can listen, because what got us here is what's going to lead to our success, and we can't really do it alone. We really need the voice of the community. So what do we do? Well, one of our most important things is also develop and implement a watershed management plan where we can actually grow water for the future. And that's going to be both programmatic, where we develop programs, and the board is in charge of adopting a plan, and then each year they're in charge of implementing the plan, or in charge of looking at the implementation status, so that it's a living document, something that we're continually evolving and working on. And it's also a document to assist as background for grant funding. So there'll be a lot of descriptions in there. So tonight we're going to ask you questions about your experience and your history, and anything you might want to share with us. If there's anybody here who really would like to share more about what used to be like here, what it feels like being in this community, you can leave the number with the facilitator, Peter, too, and we can have an extended interview with you to get your perspective. So the plan is going to be different than the state's plan. They have a plan where they focus on the pristine area at the top of the watershed with the East Maui Watershed Plan. Ours is going to be more culturally rooted, where we're really out in the communities trying to understand what were the practices in the watershed area, what were successful methods of increasing the health of the ecosystem. And then we also want to look at the ancestral knowledge, and we've hired cultural specialists who did interviews with kapuna that were born between 1910 and 1930. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Kapaa Mali. And that'll be very useful information to tell us what was the Kuleana and what of caring for the watershed and what were the expectations back then, and then any kind of protocols that were around that. And also the watershed is going to be community-based because we want to hear people's priorities, what's important to them. I mean, you have to understand the limited funding and direct it in places will not only make a difference but are important to the community. So we're building out our new watershed division. You know, we're part of the county. It takes time to do anything. We have the specialists coming up and the field staff. We're working on partnering with the community so that we actually have a presence in the watershed, and so we're not driving equipment so far too. But we're working at doing that. We've already heard about, we don't need a plan to tell us that cleaning streams will improve Maui to Makai connectivity, and that invasive species Myconia are a problem. I mean, we have some low-hanging fruit that we definitely know we can work at. Native reforestation for better resilience too. Invasives really are thirsty and soak up the water, whereas a lot of native plants know how to actually capture the water and bring it down into the watershed. I don't want to miss yesterday. So yesterday we were out in K&I and we did a field trip where we went and looked at some of the diversion areas, some of the streams, and we looked at the taro fields. And then we also did community engagement out there. And we heard a lot of really interesting things. I'm just going to tell you kind of the 3 things that I heard while I was walking around the room listening to people. And we'll put more of this on the website so you can see in depth as we kind of download all the information that we're getting from the communities. So there were acknowledgments of the damage that was done from the long-term diversions on the ecosystem, on the communities themselves, on the community practices, on the environment and the taro too, and actually the plants that needed the stream water to thrive, how without that they died. And there was a desire to pass on the watershed and the environmental information to the keiki too, just as it had been passed down from their elders. So we can work on programs that maybe go into the schools or work with young people too. And a desire to provide community benefits through job opportunities for caring for the watershed. And not only does that provide economic benefits, it provides well-being benefits for that community too, because taking care of the watershed is deeply embedded in their culture, and to go out there and care for it really helps the well-being of the people that are doing it. So for tonight's meeting, we have the Public Finance Initiative came out to help us. They're an amazing group. They've already provided so much information. They are a nonprofit on the mainland that specialize in developing programs where financing, you can embed values and inclusion of all community members into decision making. So how the meeting's going to work tonight is we sent a survey out to Kula members, and I'm going to have Shay Chan Hodges here, who's been working with us. She's going to get up and give you just a real quick summary of some of the results of that survey. And if you guys haven't seen it, go back to your emails from the Kula Community Association, and please fill out the survey and let us know what your needs are, what your priorities, what your uses of water are. And then Shay's going to turn it over to the Public Finance Initiative members, and they're going to introduce themselves to you. And then we'll do in the community engagement portion of it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shay Chan Hodges. I think some of you know me from my work on the water board years ago. And I've been working with Gina and also Stacy Alapai, and we've been putting together a lot of communications materials. One of them was this survey, and you guys are pretty outstanding. We had 72 responses in, I think, a week or something. We were kind of blown away. And just besides the water board website, the county website, we also have wikivai.org, which you may already be aware of. Sierra Club and Lucien Dene worked on that, and it's supposed to be a water resource for the entire island, but it starts with East Maui. And so all the information from these convenings is going to be on there. So you can continue to fill out the survey. I think it should be ongoing, especially because haiku is moving much slower in answering. So you guys, if you did the survey, you know these are the questions. I didn't put every single question, but I wanted to give an overview. So Do you need additional water is the basic question here. Out of 72 responses, you can see 55% said yes. Are you on the water meter list? 26.8% yes. If not, would you apply for a larger or new water meter if they were available? 30.9% yes, 42 no, and then 26%. You can read this, I'm sure. And then this is sort of interesting. If you were to have a newer, larger water meter, how would you use it? So you can see I didn't see the turtle sanctuary before, but I thought that was kind of cool. I think that's a one very small percentage. But so you can get an idea here. And then if the water meter would be for new housing, is it a primary, additional, rental, other things? So hopefully we can get more people to answer and we'll have a better perspective on it. And then how much would you grow? That was a little tricky as far as acres or pounds, so I think we probably have to clarify this better. And also, if you guys have input on how to make the survey better and more useful, you know, we started with this, and we're not necessarily survey writers either, so. And then who would your crops feed? I thought that was pretty interesting. The majority is for Ohana and Friends. So the difference was, this was if you had a water meter, who would they feed? And this is if you don't need a water meter and are currently growing food, who is it for? And I didn't put up the slide showing all the different things people would grow or are growing because it was just kind of a lot to look at. And that's it. But yeah, so please fill out the survey if you haven't already. Please tell your friends. And if you have any input on better ways of asking the questions or additional questions, that would be great. So, and I will now introduce Lourdes. And just to make a quick point, Lourdes, this is the first time they've come to Maui, but Lourdes is actually, her group PFI has helped us with a few different things. We did some teach-ins a year ago on looking at the CDBG DR funding after the fires and municipal bond financing. So she has some familiarity, and she has looked at our county budgets quite a bit, more than I have.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you, Shay. Thank you, Gina, for inviting us. It really is a privilege for our team to be here, and what we really quickly considered and learned yesterday is your living classroom, just to be able to not only hear from community, but also experience what it means to be within and in the vicinity of the watershed, and parts that are so important and vital to so many values that we know are important to you as a community. Our role here tonight is to do two things. One is to step into this work with humility to really listen and learn, and then to offer what would expertise that we could bring to the table mean for you, particularly if we center your aspirations and values. And to begin that conversation, I'll share a little bit about, looks like we don't have a PowerPoint. I'll share a little bit more about our organization and tell you how we're going to facilitate tonight's community engagement session while we deal with the technical difficulty. But as Gina mentioned, we are a nonprofit that's worked in the past 3 years with over 476 communities across the 46 U.S. states. And we work with what we consider to be the cohort of the willing, leaders who really believe that when you think about public finance, which we're going to talk about is the way that we raise and spend money in a place, there can be a role for values that's really meaningful. And we can actually center the place-based outcomes that you as a community tell us are important, and not only teach you how you can raise money in ways that perhaps are more expansive than what you're used to or have considered, or areas that are underutilized, but actually think about finance as a lever for change, a catalyst that can actually bring you closer to whatever your hope-for path is and the North Star for the community. Let's see if we have our slides. All right, well, we're going to roll with it. But part of what, to begin that work, we are hoping this evening with members of my team, who I will ask, and our experts who we brought to please stand, and just so that you know who they are, we're going to do a facilitated community engagement session, and it's going to cover 4 topics. As you see across the room, we have different flip boards set up strategically, and one covers Group 1, uses of water. Group 2, your community perspective. Group 3, we're going to talk about state policy, water rates, and availability and water needs. And Group 4, your lived experience. And what we're going to ask you to do is pick the topic that you want to talk about, go to the corner of the room where you see the board, And we're going to spend about 20 minutes in an expert-led discussion around key questions to really hear from you. And then at the end of that 20 minutes, we're going to do a quick reporting out. So everybody's going to pick somebody at the table, whether it's a facilitator or somebody designated, to take notes. And then you're going to try in the best disciplined way that we can to use 2 minutes to give a recapitulation of like what were the most important things that you talked about as a group. And then after that, we're going to go into a different dialogue and say, what could we do to empower you to meet that hope-for path? Any questions about that? All right. So pick the topic of your choice, and our facilitators, I will ask them to go to each corner of the room, and I will note when we start and when we'll keep time. Yes, so group 1, this corner of the room, uses of water. Group 2, your community perspective, where my colleague Alex is raising his hand. Group 3, here in the corner with me, state policy, water rates, and availability. Group 4, in this corner, your lived experience.
And while we're getting together, I just wanted to point out that we have our council member, Yukile Sugimura, who came here tonight. Thank you for coming. And then we have Kyle Yamashita, our state rep. So thank both of you for coming. Yes.
I know there's some really great conversations and we want to hear what everybody was talking about, so let's make sure that we transition to that portion of our evening. So why don't we go around the room, and again, in a very disciplined 2 minutes, we're going to start with this group over here, and Katie as facilitator, let me bring you the mic. Oh, you have a mic.
We have one. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Jordan Hawker. I'm the board president for the Kula Community Association. I'm going to be reporting back for our group. If you can hear the sound of my voice, clap once, I guess. There we go. All right. Beautiful. Love that. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
And Jordan, do you want to remind everybody the topic that you guys covered?
Yeah, I do. Okay. So group 1 is uses of water. Is this mic a little funny? Okay. First, we started with what are our water needs, which goes very well with the third question, which was how would additional water be used? And so what we determined in our group was that we have shortages, that household uses are very prominent, but specifically that we have agricultural needs that we would use additional water for, both subsistence farming, so the kind that was reflected in the survey, that people would be growing food for their ohana or for their neighbors. But then that due to water shortage and the water meter waiting list, we have a farmer in our group who has had to shift the crops that they grow and that they're choosing to grow because of the water issue. So we have both subsistence farming and commercial agriculture needs in our group. And then something that was repeated multiple times was the building of an ohana for your family. And so one of the things that additional water would be used for would be housing families. And I know people who live around me who have had to sell off parcels of their land because they're on the water meter waiting list. And we had 3 members of our group who have been on the list for over a decade. And so the second question that we had was, are you currently experiencing shortage or scarcity of clean water sources? One of the things we talked about was scarcity during disasters. If you're on the upper Kula water system, if your water comes from Hapapa Gulch, the line that runs across the gulch, we know that we can be without potable water for sometimes up to a month. We can experience prolonged water shortages. And so that was a theme that kept coming up. So, our challenges are community commitment to level of restrictions, like we were talking about how when we get placed on water shortage, some of our neighbors are watering their lawns and some people are trying to conserve. And so we talked about the equity issue there. One of the things that got brought up is that, Kula is a community with people who have been here forever, and then community where a lot of people from outside of Kula are moving to. And when we have people on the water meter waiting list who cannot move their family onto their property and they have to sell it, often people who are from outside of our community can afford a 50,000 gallon water catchment tank. They can afford an engineer that's required to do the proper line installation. And so we're seeing that as a water equity issue. Yeah, I'm gonna go here. And I think I've used up most of the 2 minutes, but we'll just wrap up. So yeah, additional was housing our ohanas and increasing our capacity to grow crops, whether for our families or commercially. And then we had 3 people on the water meter waiting list, which is a high saturation for such a small area. And so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's go to Alex and group 2 and remind us of the topic and then dig into the recapitulation.
Great, and I just want to thank my group for taking the time to share everything they did. Group 2 was your community perspective, and the 2 questions that we focused on are, what are the challenges Kula faces as a community with water and meeting water needs? And I think some of the things we heard from the first group really resonated here as well. And the second question, when you think about water resource planning to solve these challenges, what do you want to see? So a big thing here again was the cost of sustaining and maintaining these systems. Going back to that equity conversation, there are folks who can afford to make these upgrades, where others have been waiting in line who can't pay the price to skip the line. There's a lot of red tape when it comes to the improvements, so really focusing on how we can increase the support within this community and kind of think through how the red tape be such a big barrier to entry in making these upgrades and maintaining and upgrading the system. In terms of some of the solutions, sorry, let me flip over. Increasing the quality of the infrastructure. We talked a lot at the beginning about how a lot of the pipelines can break, and so making sure that the investment can come into the community, but how can we think about for folks who might, sorry, how can we think about potential subsidies that can support community members who can't actually pay for the level of upgrades that some others who might not, sorry, not necessarily have been here there. Hello, better? Is it a little bit better? Okay. Again, so a lot of the focus as well was around the support for water purification. The difference between the, sorry, I'm gonna just go back right here. The difference between the chlorine changing between the chloramine and how that can often contaminate the water. The fish and just the contamination of the water is a huge problem. So how can we upgrade the system so this doesn't continue to be an issue? Anybody else in my group like to add anything? Yes, for increased storage such as reservoirs. Oh. Does my group want to add anything? Okay.
Good job. Address the water meter list and Malama the Kupuna that's been waiting for 30 years. First, before all these transplants.
Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. So this was supposed to be your lived experience, but it turned into the water meter list because I think everybody's lived experience in this group was the water meter list, people having been on it for decades. So basically the conversation became what is going to be different and how will the county invest in the system? People told stories of witnessing very little progress while they're waiting. Other people talked about different workarounds, but also feeling like you almost have to go around the law to try to figure out a way to get water to do what you need. Also people noticing that there were leaks and other issues where there's a lot of water being wasted, but then they still can't get water. So there was a lot of frustration in this group a lot of distrust of government, a lot of wondering about need for transparency, but also what can they expect if they bought property and they think they're going to be able to get water and then they can't. So it was very disheartening, and just not knowing how the county policies were made or why certain things are favored and not others, or what to do and where there's going to be investment in actually water. So I think I kind of covered it. There was talk about conservation and other things too, but I think the water meter list kind of took over people's frustration. Does anyone want to add it? Okay. All right.
Thank you. So we had quite the interesting discussion, like everyone, and our topics were water rates, availability, state policy, and your needs. And when we opened up the discussion with a question about whether or not residents are open and should be paying more for water in order to have greater access and availability, there was a resounding no. And it was for two reasons. One, the focal point of the conversation around what's really needed turned to education, political, civic, and other engagement that we're going to talk about. But from the community, and our representative from Mahi Pono suggested that there's another dimension of issues where it's actually not getting people to pay more, but that there is a level of indecision within government that where the resources are there, and let me know if I'm not paraphrasing correct, that the resources are actually there financially, but the level of indecision in government is preventing the improvements to increase availability and meet the needs that folks in this room are talking about. So beyond that, we said, okay, surfacing all perspectives, what are the other crux of the issues in which the state policymakers know? And that's where our discussion turned to, first, the importance of civic engagement. I think folks talked about people need to really understand how their voting power translates to their ability to elect leaders who really reflect the values and that they're going to drive forward the projects that community believes are important. The nexus of real estate development and infrastructure issues, there's a sequencing and mismatching of the development process within the state agencies, or a perception and understanding that that is the case where, and I know you will describe this better than I do, that's really at the crux of thinking about availability issues. There also hasn't been a centralized Maui County water management plan that's comprehensive and also looks beyond just kind of one discrete neighborhood and community, but actually even someone suggested statewide, which is vital. And there are neighborhoods who are really feeling the lack of, for example, ag water. They're experiencing this even if they want to have like a garden in their backyard, and they don't understand how policy making that's happening in the absence of a comprehensive plan is leading to decisions that could be different for you at the neighborhood level. In addition to that, someone mentioned that there's no consensus and understanding comprehensively of just what are the costs that are really needed to say we're going to focus on reservoir repairs, components of the water system that are vital, and really to be able to do a prioritization with a real understanding through costs. In addition, there is a need to educate younger generations who want to farm, need resources, and really have the desire to learn. And there's also no understanding of how state funding works and how decisions are being made with a non-politicized lens that actually prioritizes both an understanding of costs and needs comprehensively and also centers community voice. And Bobby, I'd love to invite you to share some of your perspectives to make sure that I've captured all the issues.
You're very good at tying everything together. I think my biggest deal is in addressing probably everything over here. I believe that it stems from the lack of education in our community in regards to how do you get things done in the state, whether it be water, whether it be whatever it is, right? It's understanding, before I used to blame the politicians, okay? I don't do that anymore, right? What I do now, I take it upon myself as an individual. I take it upon all our community members on engaging civically. And I believe that we don't do it because there's a lack of trust, number one, in government. And number two, we're uneducated So therefore we don't engage. It's about time that we stop pointing our fingers at our policymakers, our legislators, and start accepting the responsibility of ourselves, engaging civically, and then I strongly believe in creating a marketing campaign. Like anytime you want to make any kind of change, it takes marketing. So what I'm saying is, how's about creating a marketing campaign to address our issues so we can educate the would-be voters, the non-voters, and the voters, so we can move the needle. Yep.
Thank you. Anybody else from the group want to add anything I've missed?
Thank you. I guess I'm clean up here. One thing that we thought would be useful would be that each of the subsystems of the Maui Water Department, the Water Board, is a separate system. There's a South and Central system, there's a West Maui, there's an Upcountry system, but the planning is not done by system. In other words, even though the Upcountry system is not connected to Downcountry, and none of them are connected to West Maui, we need to really look at what are the options that we have Upcountry so that the people who are on the water meter list don't continually get frustrated. And by that I mean we have various options out there. We have reservoirs as a possibility. We have developing new sources, whatever that might be, and that could include wells or connecting up to the East Maui system. Whatever it is, somehow a plan for Upcountry needs to be together to take a look at our system that stretches from Haiku all the way past Ulapalakua to Kanaio. And that system would then it would look at the various parameters, what can be done. We have now 2 existing pipelines. There's a third one that's been built. 2/3 of it has been built. How should that be integrated into the system? And then take a look at the costs, and then figure out how those costs can be paid for. Do the rates need to be adjusted? Right now we have a system with multiple rates for agriculture, hotels, residences, commercial, etc. And they're now progressive rates. In other words, as you use more, you pay more. But maybe they're not progressive enough, so that they dissuade people from wasting water. Or maybe they're too progressive. Those kind of studies and that kind of discussion needs to happen. The present Maui Water Use and Development Plan, unfortunately, because it was set up by the state, does not look at the Upcountry system as a separate system. They've tied this area where we're standing right now in with South Maui, South and Central Maui as a area, even though our water does not in any way come from there and we don't deliver water to them, but rather we should be connected to some of the East Maui aquifers. So those are the number of substantive things that need to be changed, and I think we would get some better policies if we can put those things together.
Thank you. All right, we'll take one more comment. This is really your voices we want to hear.
Thank you. I'm Heather Mueller, and I've been a part of the Kula Community Association since the beginning, along with Dick and some others. And to go back to what you were saying in terms of coming together and being educated and then having a voice and having an impact on the powers that be and decision makers, I cannot suggest anything better than the Kula Community Association. And people are very, very welcome to join. And if you want more information about that, you can ask me or Dick or other members that are probably here tonight. So the Kula Community Association is alive and well and making a difference and open to members.
That is a wonderful segue to our next portion, and so inspiring. I'm going to ask experts to join me up here and tell you what we're going to do, because I think your comment on making a difference is precisely why we exist as a nonprofit, why we're here, and what we hope to inspire is how do you take that desire and move towards action, and what can we share with you? And I will tell you, and please join me up here, what each of our experts and I collectively are thinking about is how do we support you in centering community, indigenous, cultural heritage practices that can really shape the future of a water system, so that when you look 5 years, 3 years, 1 year down the line, you've seen place-based outcomes that match the aspirations we've talked about in this room last night across community members who might not be here, in ways that resonate and hold the principle that Gina so artfully described as the motto and purpose of the East Maui Water Authority. So to that end, I'm going to ask Katie, Andrew, and Dr. Chief to please join me up here. And yesterday we had the benefit of introducing their backgrounds really early in the day because we all spent the day in what we consider to be the living classroom, really touring and seeing the water system and hearing from community. And when Katie joins me, I'm going to ask each of our experts to describe, starting with Katie and then going down the row, their backgrounds and the disciplines that they're going to share their expertise from, and then I will kick off our presentation. Katie, do you want to go first?
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Katie Hansen. I'm trained in political science and have been working in water resource management in South Africa and the Middle East and the US for the last 15 years, so happy to share some lessons from those case studies.
I am Bitterwater. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation, and I'm the director of the Indigenous Resilience Center. My background is environmental engineering and hydrology and water resources, and I work with indigenous communities on food, energy, and water challenges that are culturally based and community driven. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Andrew Simmons. I have a background. I worked as an anthropologist in urban planning with an engineering firm in Asia for a while, and in the UK recently with a British NGO. And we worked with several water utilities, including in Australia. And I'll be presenting a case study with a project called the water utility is called Hunter Water. And I also have some, which is publicly on water utility, and I have other experience in integrated planning, which is another way to say just coordination of urban planning with other sectors, and I think that's something that's important with bringing in different domains and sectors and voices. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Great. So our homework has been to think, how do we empower and help you with lessons that exist outside of your borders and that can really catalyze change? So to begin that, we know that, and as executive director of the Public Finance Initiative, I have the privilege of thinking about this every day, and it's the topic of like my life's career as a public finance professional, where I was an attorney, investment banker, worked within an investment firm, so really on the side that never thought about dollars and cents other than separate from values, to really marry those two disciplines and bring that to this discussion. And we know that a plan without resources is just an aspiration. And here, I think what we've surfaced is that there could be more resources than you're aware of, possibly, and that government action certainly is at the crux of that in multiple dimensions that this could take. So how do you fund your aspirations? And I'm going to start with a basic primer that, in case you've never heard the term public finance, we want to make sure you can participate in this discussion. And then my colleagues are going to guide you through a conversation that says, and how do you not only pay for the things that we've heard are important, but how do you do that? Centering community, centering indigenous practices, really considering that community engagement doesn't just end here. So what is this photo? Think about it. What could it be? Where could it be? How could it be relevant to this discussion? If you're thinking this is an aquifer in Missoula, Montana, you're right. You're right. And this is representative of how a small city took on a financial giant and gained 100% control of their water system after decades of what the mayor described, a water system passing from private investor to private investor who did not care about the community. I am in no way suggesting that is what is happening here. I'm just saying that this is emblematic of one of the few examples in America of a community where the desire in North Star is to go from private to full public control, that it is possible. And that there are also incremental lessons that one can learn. And the biggest takeaway that I had in reading this that surfaced yesterday were one of the predominant pieces from the K&I community was control and ownership need to be re-envisioned and reimagined, is that what does it take beyond political will? It considers that it's important to think about blending and braiding areas of public finance that perhaps you've thought about in a vacuum. So in Missoula, Montana, to not belabor the point, they had to use their powers of eminent domain. They use tools that you use, including appropriations from what's called the General and Governmental Fund. They couple that with not saying, hey, we're never going to go to investors, but they're now bringing investors in differently, retaining control across certain areas that they had given up before. And it's an example of what's possible when you center the needs and the voices of the community, and that is your aspiration. As a nonprofit, we really take pride in never telling anybody what to do. We say, what is your hope for a path, and how do we help you in view of that? And separate from the priority of control, these are just some of the community needs that were surfaced yesterday, and many of which I'm sure came up in this room, including not only do we need to think about water, but the nexus to housing, the nexus to nature-based solutions, thinking about culture, thinking about individuals who perhaps are facing emotional grief due to the issues that are surfacing around water and displacement, real things that need resources in very different ways. And one of the key things that the county has done historically beyond water is, if you ask yourself, how are we paying for any of these things? There's been a history of advancing what's called pay-as-you-go. And to make sure that we can understand, well, what does that mean and what could you do differently? We're going to tackle 3 questions in the next 15 minutes or so. Is first, how do you leverage public finance for whatever the priorities are on a long-term and short-term basis? Second, what role can something beyond pay-as-you-go, called municipal bonds, play in your strategy? And third, what questions should you be asking as a community or your leaders be asking to realize place-based aspirations when you're putting together new pieces of your financial tool chest like a puzzle? So first, just to make sure that we all have a shared understanding, when I say public finance, it's really simple. I'm talking about the way that government raises and spends money. This is a really, really hard area, but this is a way that you can just, it's the simplest definition you can think of, which is true to what it is. Beyond that, it gets a little bit deeper. You say, well, how does the county fund anything? And the words on this circle represent how any community in America, the county, fund any project, and of course there's a square called other. And I'll describe really briefly what they are. So pay as you go, just as it sounds, you pay for things as you go. So you go to the store, you use cash. You don't use a credit card. Think about that as a human being. Governments do the same thing. Maui County does a lot of pay as you go, particularly for water. Municipal bonds and lending instruments. You go to investors and you ask them to believe in you, to lend you money, and you pay them back. Something called debt service, principal and interest over time for possibly 30, 40 years. You raise a lot of money up front. Land value capture, where you think about land as your biggest resource and you say, what are we doing with real estate markets? And is it the right thing to make sure reinvestment really stays and lives here in the way that we need? Or are we leaving money and opportunity on the table? Public-private partnerships, something you've already seen the history of with Mahi Pono and others that have really been a fixture of your community and public finance strategy. And then, of course, something that's more emergent. So many of you are familiar with grants where a foundation or a philanthropist can write you a really big check and you don't have to ever pay that money back. You just have to do something in alignment with their mission and yours. But an emergent area that's really powerful for you to consider are program-related investments, where a foundation can come in and beyond grant making, actually become a social investor in community with mission guiding the purpose. And then other tools that we won't cover this evening. So in order to say, well, how do you make sense of this and like what fits here? We want to make sure that you have a shared understanding of the resource base. So does anybody here know, how does the county make money and pay for anything? You're right. Everybody here would get an A on the quiz. So if we were to say, like, let's look at the framework of fiscal governance, or how is government set up to do this fiscal decision making, both raising and spending money, 3 things become really salient. So Article 8, Chapter 19 of the revised charter of the County of Maui really sets forward the powers of this authority. But then we look at the Department of Water Supply, set up as a separate agency, also within the mayor's executive management. And both of these departments really draw from a larger sense an agency, not only the general fund, but also, as we know, the rate structure behind the water system. And one of the most exciting opportunities, especially to somebody who loves public finance like me, is you are on the precipice of creating an enterprise fund for regional water investment, particularly under that new section of the charter that established the authority, which creates an opportunity, as we're going to talk about, for you to ask really important questions about the future of how you want to fund the system and the role of community. And if I were to look through your 300-page financial documents, as our team did really joyfully to understand you, This is where we would figure out that indeed you are predominantly property, not only property tax, but other tax-owned source revenues is the biggest source of money. It's the blue section of the pie. That's a really good thing. And when you think about it, that's what's been supporting pay-as-you-go. So the ability to really pay for things in real time. So when we say, well, why would you move away from that? And what's your opportunity to start thinking, is that really the right and most best way, particularly when we say the water system will fit within this framework? The top question you might want to start with is, how do you design a rate setting plan for this new regional water system fund? Do you want that money to be used for operations and maintenance? Do you want the flexibility to use that money to secure debt, to raise millions of dollars in one day that you use and lock in for 30, 20, 40 plus years for the projects that matter in the community? Or do you want to continue doing pay-as-you-go for projects that are either just water focused, or do you want to think more expansively? As we started the meeting with Gina mentioning that some people are saying, hey, I want to see a breadbasket in this community, food security and other issues that often don't receive funding in a priority way within a water system become a mandate and charge of the authority where you take leadership. So the benefits of pay-as-you-go is obviously, as you know, you go to the store, you have fiscal discipline, you only spend the money that you have. The risk is, what happens if money isn't appropriated? What happens if it's not enough? What happens if there are other concerns? The way that you solve for that in a community is beginning to understand, and here you see, like, what if we paid for just the things on this chart with pay-as-you-go, and here on the right, what if we did it differently? What if we had more options? What if we started assigning different methods to different pieces of what matters, giving us not only more money that we can keep and use for other purposes, but optionality? And this is something that you can plan for when you set up the structure of that regional fund, particularly as it relates to water and the priorities, including where does education come from? Would you have workforce, opportunities to build in for people who are doing labor, particularly caring for their water system with cultural heritage practices and not being compensated for that? What about systems improvements we've talked about that are part of a regional plan or statewide plan that needs to be thought of? So beyond that, you have an opportunity to think, could we be using an instrument that is being underutilized more? And that's municipal bonds and lending instruments, which must be used carefully. For those who are not familiar with this, let's do a little bit of an exercise. If I was Gina or any leader in Maui, and I would say, how do I meet an investor using a municipal bond? Like, what does that mean? You'd have to do these 9 things. And this would apply to pretty much any government that's a general government at a county, state, local level in the United States. First, you need an idea, like, what is it that you want to pay for? Is it eligible for the tax subsidy that municipal bonds carry, which is why investors really love them? And there's a $4 trillion market of money out there for the taking that is robust, not changing despite political and different economic factors, and a staple of the American infrastructure finance system. And then you want to think about your capacity to go through those 9 squares and basically think, how do we want to sell the deal? How do we structure the capacity to pay investors principal and interest throughout a really long duration? How do we make sure that we're not doing those payments on the back of a rate setting structure that could be inequitable to the community, and which we could come to regret? So you have to ask really hard questions and also make sure that the market believes in you and will let you sell and raise that money, sell the bonds and raise the money at the lowest possible price. And this morning we had a discussion about the county's history in using what are called general obligation bonds. Guess what pays those back? The property tax. So really sort of the pledge to the investor who believes in you and who's going to loan you money. In this case, you have an opportunity with the creation of the regional fund to think, could we raise money from investors and actually begin to think about the rate structure more expansively, so that we don't just do municipal bonds, but we can actually raise money at scale in tandem with other approaches, i.e. giving you a wider suite of tools to pay for the many things that we've heard you need and want. And obviously with all of these approaches, including pay-as-you-go that you see compared here on this chart, the way that you're going to choose between either that or the extent to which you continue down the road of public-private partnerships with Mahi Pono and others, or you diversify towards bringing investors differently through the bond market, where you do not give up control over the water system, but you bring in the resources, will turn upon at least like 3 questions. What is it that you want to do? What are the cost-benefit analysis, the negatives and the positives of each approach, and what are your values? And the values conversation needs to not just be in the project, but also making sure that you are making a financial choice that will not undermine and harm communities in the ways we've heard you've experienced. And separately from that, I went a little too quickly. Can you go back to the slide, please? I think the slide advancer is not working, or there's an error. Sorry for the technical difficulties this evening, but this is authentic community engagement. Well, I'll tell you, part of what I was going to talk about next is with municipal bonds, you also have an opportunity to do something really novel that communities across America, particularly other counties, have been innovating. So let's take the issue of food security, where you could say, hey, micro-entrepreneurship, people in this community, they might have solutions to that, and they might know how to create the bread basket that has been the topic of so many conversations. You could actually create a way for not only taking the money that you would have through pay-as-you-go, bringing in foundations, and creating vehicles in perpetuity that could give people not only the agency to sit in a meeting and say, hey, this is important, but the opportunity to actually receive microloans and to contribute to what it means to actually turn the community into a breadbasket, to think about their agency in affordable housing growth, to think about their agency across a whole number of issues by structuring not only the opportunity to bring in money from the regional fund on a one-time basis where you would give money to the community, but actually creating a vehicle that exists in perpetuity. One of the communities that's done this is Macon-Bibb County, Georgia, and I see that they're trying to bring up the slides. That community specifically recognized that when they use lending vehicles, they could achieve some of the benefits and mitigate the risks that are on this slide. Okay, let me go back. So one of the benefits of thinking about lending instruments when used correctly is that you can not only invest in deferred maintenance at scale, so some of the system improvements that are needed, you can invest in expansion projects. You can actually achieve what's called intergenerational equity, i.e. you think about the future generations that we talked about so intently who should participate in paying for the system and doing so in a way that is fair. You can also engage in asset liability matching, thinking about what is the useful life of the different components of the system. And you can make strategic choices, again, about the way that you pledge revenue so that it's not just the one use of the funds going out of the bank account of the government and this new regional fund. And in leveraging what are called program-related investments from foundations, one of the key things that can do is actually come in and having a partner who will provide you with credit support so that the market can actually believe that not only will you stand behind the obligation, but that you could actually raise money at the lowest possible price, because that is at the heart of what future generations will look to for that liability, i.e. that you have not created a cost burden where we already have heard the issues that the community is facing. And this is typically just kind of a really simple diagram of the three components that you would bring together like a puzzle to really create a perpetual fund that, supported by your regional fund, could actually create the opportunity for food insecurity and other issues to really be put into the hands of the community in a really meaningful way. So I will end the presentation here and just mention that our goal here today is not to be prescriptive and tell you do this, do that, but to help you think, how do you use every arrow in the quiver differently, including the ones that you may be leaving on the table. And as my colleague Carletta Chief will explain, to do so with awareness and attention to cultural heritage practices and so many other pieces that are going to be surfaced in our conversation. So Dr. Chief, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hello. Today I want to share some information about community-driven engagement around water. And as we call it, To'e ina, water is life. And through your conversations, you have really expressed that in how water is important for your livelihoods, for your everyday uses. And I am motivated by my own experiences as well, having been been raised on the Navajo Nation in an area that has been impacted by coal mining. And when coal is mined, it impacts the water. And so with the people who live there who didn't have access to running water, but yet mining continued to occur there. So I really heard a lot of the concerns here with people being on the water list. And so water insecurity is something I'm very familiar with in tribal communities. The center that I direct is really focused on how communities can solve the challenges in the food, energy, water nexus using community knowledge, traditional knowledge, and community-driven solutions. And we also aim to build up the next generation of young people that can have the workforce skills to be problem solvers within the food, energy, water nexus, whether that's technology or community-driven solutions. When we think about resilience, we have to look at it holistically and look at it from different aspects. And so that's why we need the community involvement, because we bring to the table our own knowledge, our lived experiences, the various water uses that we have, and that helps us to build that resilience at the household level, community level, and tribal nations. So when you engage in your water planning, you have to think about the different factors of the system, whether that's socioeconomic, political, infrastructure, ecosystem services, or spiritual and cultural values. We need to come to the table with all of these perspectives and all of these knowledges so that we can build a resilient plan that can be applicable when there's fires, when there's climate change, droughts, and so forth. So be thinking about that in your work. What are those perturbations and what are those factors that can contribute to community resilience? So looks like we're having technical difficulties again, but I can just continue to speak. In the work that I do with indigenous communities, there are different types of water uses that are important for indigenous communities that are different from the everyday uses such as flushing your toilet or drinking water. And that is cultural and spiritual purposes. And for many tribes, that is inherent in their identity, their life ways, their beliefs. And so I've worked with many communities in ensuring that that is categorized and quantified in a way that can advocate for their water rights. And so, but a lot of that data is to be protected, and that's what we call data sovereignty. So as a community, you can write a data management plan and dictate how you want that data to be used and to be protected. And for many communities that I work with, they already have frameworks. And so frameworks are important to do this type of community solving, community-driven problem solving. And there is a process for community engagement that is different and different for different communities. And I know Katie's gonna talk about the basics of community engagement, but what I wanna share is community engagement for indigenous communities, in which it's really important to have trust, to build that trust. And the partnerships within these different efforts have to be built on trust and being able to work together and co-produce that data, co-produce that knowledge so that it can result in co-design. And so co just means we work together as members of different communities, but also that it's important to have the ethics in how we do that, making sure you write the data sovereignty protocols, how to protect your data, how to use your data, how to manage it, making sure we have approvals from the different communities in that work, and then together co-produce the information, co-producing information about the watershed, co-characterizing it, and then working together to disseminate that information and then giving back that information to contribute to workforce development, building up young people so that they can be involved and they can become the next leaders, the next environmental managers, the water leaders. So it's a cyclical process and it's ongoing for whatever project you're working on. But there are data principles out there to protect data. The biggest one is called the CARE principles, to make sure that data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and that it's for the collective benefit, that the community has authority to control it. There's responsibility and ethics for that data. So as you develop your water management plan, you'll need data to manage that water, whether it's water quality data, water usages, and ensuring that we think about how that data is managed. So I want to give an example of a tribe that I work with, which is the Navajo Nation. And the Navajo Nation has in their laws how data is used for the benefit of the community. And through those laws, they approve what kind of projects are done on the Navajo Nation and how data is managed and used. And it has to have community approval. So all these pictures on here are resolutions by the community on that particular project and how that data is used. And there's an oversight committee, and I heard a lot of people talking about the committees they're on, the boards that are on. Those are local governance structures that can help to provide oversight for how that data is used. But this is an example of a water GIS portal that was created for the Navajo Nation, and it compiled data that was collected by a lot of different entities, such as a USGS, Army Corps of Engineers, university scientists, students, NGOs, but they were all over the place. And the people couldn't access that readily to help inform their decision making at the local level. So what we did is we compiled all that water data into one GIS portal so that the individual citizen or leader could go on this website and click on any of these dots here and then click on it and get all the data that was compiled for that site. And this data is data that the community agreed that could be publicly accessible for that community. And so this is an example of how data governance is important. Data collection is important to benefit the community so they have access to that information and be able to use it for data management and data decision. Uses are also important. So we all use water in different ways. And it's important to think about how water could be used in a community. This is an example of how one community along the San Juan River used water. So the non-indigenous users use the river for recreation. They may have a bottle there that they may filter the water with. They may boat or canoe along the river. But then the local community, the indigenous community, actually have a different reality in that they use the river for medicine, for cultural purposes, for basketry, for ranching, hunting, and agricultural purposes. So it's really important that the uses are all captured adequately. And so this is an example of how people knew how they used the water, but then it hadn't ever been actually quantified. So in this work with the community, we were able to do surveys across the community, 12 different communities, and ask people, how do you use your water? And as a result, we were able to quantify 42 different uses. And cultural and spiritual had the highest, 14, and recreational had 12. Livelihood had 9, and arts and craft had 7. So this was important because when the community advocated at the state level, they could present this information. And the river was unfortunately contaminated, and there was a lawsuit between the state, the tribes, and the federal government. And they were able to use this data to show that they were actually impacted by this water contamination. Had they not had this information, they couldn't back up their testimony. So that's an example of how data was important. And there are many different types of plans out there that can be useful to you as an example. There's community-based watershed planning, indigenous plans, and so make sure you do look out and do that search as examples. And when we do collaborative water management, it's really a community effort. We come together to develop future plans. We use different scenarios to think about all the different scenarios that we might encounter, such as fire, such as drought, so forth. And in order to do that, Billy, was it Billy? Bobby was saying, we need to educate ourselves about our system. So we gotta understand our watershed, we gotta understand the policies, and in that way, work together to create these plans. So when somebody like us comes in, who are scientists or engineers, we think of the system in our own way. We look at the variables, we look at the structure, but actually you are the experts. The community is the expert. And so when you add your knowledge to that planning, the community map is more comprehensive. And so I encourage you as you engage, like Bobby was saying, get engaged in as a civic participant. And in that way, your knowledge will allow us to create a better plan for the future. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share my work, and I hope that's helpful in your work as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you everybody. For my part of the presentation tonight, I'm going to think about, now that we've surfaced some of these values that we really want to guide the future actions of the Watershed Authority, what are some ways that we can put those into practice, right? Some pretty pragmatic lessons and tools that have come from work I've done previously to think about what is it going to take to realize some of these dreams that we've started to surface and to address some of the real anxieties that have come up in this work. And the 4 main takeaways to kind of hold in our back pockets are: number 1, we can only move at the speed of trust, right? Number 2, it's crucial to continue to engage meaningfully like we have tonight in this community forum. Number 3, we have to address power imbalances if we're going to get the values into practice. And number 4, to hold ourselves accountable and to hold up ways to maintain transparency to move forward. Should I be standing further away?
No, that's better, actually.
Okay.
If you go over there, you're going to be behind the mic and it's going to feed back into the
Okay. It's just, okay. I won't move. Okay, thank you. That seems better. Okay. Let's all take a little breath here. Here we go. All right, so as we're thinking about this, right, how do we put these values into practice? It can be so overwhelming in an environment like this in water resource management where decisions are made in multiple levels. So when we study this from the environmental policy standpoint, we often think about this 3-layer cake or a multiple layer cake where there's the county and there's the state and there's a local community board and there's teeny little parts of the catchment and associations that are within this part that of course are interconnected to other parts, and understanding and getting clarity around that framework of saying, when we're looking at water, which is crossing jurisdictions and it's crossing functions, which decisions do we need to focus on in that? And of course, because it is this multiple layer cake, it's going to take collaboration, as we've surfaced tonight, to really bring these values into practice, right? We're going to need to work together towards hopefully mutually beneficial aims. And where we can get stuck is if there's a lack of trust and a lack of transparency, and we're not sure we can trust like other stakeholders in this catchment to work together, it's hard to move forward in a collaborative manner towards those for values that we want to realize as a collective. And so engaging meaningfully and addressing power imbalances and maintaining transparency can really help us in trying to build trust and move forward together. So thinking about engaging meaningfully, here I would say it can be so deeply demoralizing to show up at these community meetings and put some great ideas on sticky notes and then do that month after month or year after year and trying to understand. So I think that the onus really is on the organizers who are inviting you here to be very clear about how are these feedback sessions, how is this input going to be put into practice? Where are we trying to influence decisions? Which person can help us with that? And then thinking about removing some of the practical barriers to participation, right? When are the meetings held? How is the information disseminated? Who are the messengers? And one thing that can be really helpful that we did in South Africa was, this is called our river basin game. It's based on Bruce Langford's work. And what I loved about this is that it's very interactive and visual, and it's scenario-based in a way that can help us think about moving forward in these allocation decisions. So there's different fields, right, available, or we could think about different users. Sometimes we put towns and cities in this board, and we have the marbles that are actually representing, so many millions of gallons of water. And then to really talk about, well, here's how I want to allocate the water within this basin. Or if we make those decisions upstream, what's going to happen downstream? There's been a fire, we have some kind of E. coli contamination, which is going to, take some part of the system out for a while. There's a way in this interactive kind of game method to really be clear about what are we talking about when we're talking about our allocation values, how do we get those into practice, what does that look like, and being able to scenario plan in a way that helps us realize that future. So I think this is a great tool to keep in mind. Right, when we think about addressing the power imbalances, which can really be at the root of some of those lack of trust issues, There can be imbalances in resources, there can be imbalances in knowledge, there can be imbalances in just the ability to participate based on time constraints and other things that pull us in. And that can get entirely overwhelming, right? And what the Watershed Authority needs to think through is, where are we going to start, right? One thing that can really help with this overwhelm, I think, is trying to pull something down from big vision work, which is crucial for the shared vision and our consensus building on where we want to move, and getting to a point of saying, okay, and tactically, what's our next step? And here, right, I think that process of moving from a broad goal down to some short-term wins that we can get to can help to move through some sort of strategic planning like this, where you start with really clearly articulating the goal and what we're trying to accomplish, right? We're frustrated that there have been people that are waiting for water meters for this long, right? What are we going to do about that, right, in the next month, in the next year? Something that's time-bound, something that's specific. This is crucial, right, to then think, who's your target in that goal, right? And we'll do an exercise later as we move through this. So I think right now, if we want to just take a minute to think through, and we've started that tonight, is there a goal that you're holding on to that's in your back pocket that thinks, if I could do one thing in this watershed, right, what is it that I really want to accomplish? A water meter, okay, good. Fix the pipes, great. Others? What was that? Storage. Okay, those are some great examples to think through. And then the second part of that would be the target, right? Who has the power to give you that? And we're trying to, right, create and support the creation of the panel. A lot of that is the authority, but in this place, right, in storage, who can make the decision to fund and finance some storage? Where is that plan going to be based? All right. Then that second piece the third piece then is moving into the tactics, right? What steps can we take? I love to start to think into these pragmatic pieces. So tactically, what are we going to do to start to influence that target who has the power to give you what you want? What resources do you need? And then this fifth step here is mapping out your allies and your opponents in that, right? Who's with you, who can help you get there, and who's against you. And the way that this can be done is what is called a power map. It looks like this, where we have support down at the bottom here, which is thinking about when you're thinking through that target, right? If you're trying to build some storage in this, who's an active ally with you, right? Who wants to help you with that? And who might be the opponents, right? And so this is that, right, axis on the bottom here is thinking about who's with you, who's against you. And on the y-axis, on this vertical line here, we have how much power do they have? How much influence do they have over that decision, right? What can they bring to bear? If there's journalists that are with you or not, right, how much publicity do they get? How much does that influence other decision makers, right? So you have low amounts of power and high amounts of power. So if you take a minute and think about that, what was our target and who's with us and who's not with you? It's good to just kind of first run through a list, right? What are your immediate stakeholders that are, like, what are different jurisdictions? Who are the economic powers that might be with you? Who are the sort of media people? Who are the politicians, right, that might be with you or not? And you can start to actually map them and put them on this power map, right? So you might have some ally who's with you, really with you, totally on board with what you're wanting to do, but has a relatively low amount of power, right? You might have an opponent who's really strongly against what you're trying to accomplish, and they might have a huge amount of power. And then you say, okay, well, great, Katie, what do we do with that? And this is really one of my favorite things of all environmental policy is you have several options, which can be encouraging. So if you're working with your active allies to take a step forward, what's next? One thing you can think through tactically is, what do we do to increase the amount of powers your allies have, right? Who's with you and how can you increase their influence or increase the amount of resources that they have? And on the opponent side, right, you can try to decrease the amount of power they have. That can be really difficult. So I really love this option, which is, what if you just invite your opponents to be a little bit less strongly opposed to you, right? What would it take to pull them into being just a little bit more neutral about that? And these shifts can really unlock quite a bit of things. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Hi there, Andrew Simmons is my name again. Where do I need to go? Yeah, I don't have the magic touch. Didn't happen yesterday. Really good to be with you all. It's better over here. Yeah. She is good. Thanks. Apparently this is the spot to be in. This is the sweet spot. Yeah, so I'm gonna just go in a little bit to a case study, Hunter Water in Australia. But before I do, I wanted to frame it with something that if you were to go into the water utilities documents as well as the planning authority, that usually the first page actually has an acknowledgement of country in it. And I'll just read this to you. We acknowledge the traditional countries of and then it names 4 of the communities, of the Aboriginal communities in the Hunter Valley of Australia, and the countries on which we operate and beyond where our water flows. We recognize and respect the cultural heritage, beliefs, and continuing connection to the lands and waters of its traditional custodians, and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And from my understanding, seeing that was beautiful when we actually started to work with Hunter Water. And from my understanding, that there were lots of bottom-up processes that led to that type of acknowledgement over decades, and then ended up in legislation. So that then this is sort of embedded throughout a lot of planning documents, and on the right is a map of the water utilities area of operations with traditional boundaries overlaid, and so I thought that it just is interesting that is seen consistently through a lot of this water utility. Now, I'll get into the context in the next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so this is just an artist's illustration of the catchment area, but there are some clear differences. Certainly with this, with Hunter Water, with East Maui, certainly scale, and so make no mistake. So Hunter Water serves 530,000 or so users, but I just wanted to flag that up front. When I was working with a UK NGO, we worked for a few years on climate forecasting and scenario planning, and then even during then and since have discovered that Hunter Water is recognized internationally for its management practices of strategic planning to some degree, what Katie represented, and then we can and we're going to look through some of the processes and documents just to give a little snapshot of that, and so that's sort of what we're going to do here. It's just a little different, but I thought that it could provide some transferable lessons and resources for you, and just some stuff to think about. Thanks. So a lot of the recognition, and even so, when I was working in the UK with a water utility in the southwest, that they were already looking at Australian water utilities, especially their experiences with drought and what is expected to be climate issues that the UK would soon face, and that Australia is currently facing in the present time. And a lot of this started with severe drought throughout Australia, starting about 2 decades ago, and especially a decade ago. And this led to sustainability planning and water security plans that sort of function as living documents that are constantly updated and dynamically. And so this is representing the governance and sustainability planning for Hunter Water, and just to give a taste of some of the different types of stakeholder group representations. That in the center is the Hunter Water, the Water Board, which approves the strategies, but then there are nominations and committee, governance committee, the people and culture committee, which monitors culture, capability, and development of Hunter Water's people, including in response to emerging sustainability trends, challenges, and opportunities. And then there's the audit and risk committee, the sustainability committee, and the investment committee. And that's just one example of that. And next slide, please. So this is just again like a snapshot of the strategic plan. I believe the 2023, so basically, Hunter Water coordinates with the state of New South Wales. So it's interesting when you look back and forth between planning documents of the state of New South Wales with Hunter Water, and can see the coordination that goes back and forth between the different agencies and even working groups, cross-agency working groups, and how they inform each other of different problems and issues. And so currently, there's been a separation of responsibilities that initially led to what now is the strategic approach that Hunter Water is facing during this period when there were competing uses for water resources, which is a familiar tale with water utilities, and then especially, as I said, from 2005 until 2015 or so, in response to drought, which led to the adoption of these integrated water resource management approaches, and so on the right, I'll just read. I don't think the people in the back can read that. So some of the working groups then would through participatory approaches so there's at the end I have resources that show like a value study of and then how that outcome then informed what ended up being these drivers for change. And this is summarized of just some of the key drivers for change that's facing the Hunter Water region: increasing environmental and social challenges, a growing region, a more variable climate, increasing expectations and regulations, and navigating uncertainty and complexity. And we'll go a little deeper in the next slide. And I'll just hone in on a few of those. So increasing environmental and social challenges. So this would be water security, biodiversity loss, and intergenerational equity, which you heard about actually in the example of the municipal bond, are some of the current and emerging challenges that Hunter Water faces. And so this publicly owned water utility of Hunter Water will consider the diverse current needs of its communities and environment, and future risks and opportunities to create a sustainable water future for all. Hunter Water is facing rapid population growth, so it's a growing region. But I'll skip the description of that one. A more variable climate. Hunter Water's assets, operations, and services are exposed to a range of climate change risks, including increased severity of weather events, increasing mean temperatures, more frequent and severe droughts, wildfires, bushfires, as they say in Australia, and rising sea levels. Hunter Water and its community needs to respond to the physical and transitional risks and opportunities that a changing climate presents at the right time to ensure a resilient future. And then increasing expectations and regulations. Hunter Water's customers, communities, and stakeholders expect Hunter Water to be open and transparent in providing services that meet its community's needs without compromising the ability of future generations to do the same. As Hunter Water's regulatory and reporting expectations evolve, we must anticipate future shifts and ensure our readiness to adapt and respond. And then the last driver, navigating uncertainty and complexity. And this would include navigating future uncertainties and being well positioned to respond and then being able to adapt. And the next slide, please. So as part of that, and we helped with this process a few years ago of incorporating what they call guide rails. So examples would include delivering commercial value, trusted relationships, learning with First Nations wisdom, planning for future generations, listening and doing, and digital transformation. And I'll just touch on a few of those. Delivering commercial value, that can be sort of self-explanatory. Developing local spend metric and baselines, sustainable procurement gap, assessment and roadmaps, the guide rail for trusted relationships. Partnering with customers and community and industry groups, local councils, regional bodies, and research institutions to innovate together and leverage resources and knowledge. And that's when we were there, it was really interesting. We were a UK NGO working with Imperial College London and with 2 local universities in Australia, and then they already had networks and relationships and in the Hunter Valley region, and then Hunter Water as a utility had its own working groups, and so we had all these active networks, and then created new networks from that, and it was interesting just to see how future opportunities could emerge just when all these different types of groups came together. Planning for future generations was an interesting one, embedding intergenerational equity and sustainability principles into our policy, into its strategic planning, and into its investment and risk frameworks. And so examples, like tangible examples of this include actively engaging with young people to inform decision making. So obviously, again, a utility like Hunter Water is larger and more resourced. I've been absolutely exceptionally impressed with East Maui, but it's a much smaller example of this. But to make no mistake about a lot of this would be ambitious to try to attempt. But in the case of Hunter Water, that they have ongoing I think about 2 decades work with schools and working with the curriculum, and so those are just types of things that that could emerge out of just community-driven activities, and also embedding intergenerational equity and sustainability principles into the decision-making frameworks and guidelines. And so it's people on some of the water working groups then going to planning meetings and insisting that there's better integration. And thinking about the future and future needs and of different types of populations. So that's how that could play out. Integrating social and community outcomes into decision-making frameworks, even developing biodiversity monitoring and reporting frameworks. And we have a robust Sierra Club here and other environmental NGOs and activist organizations. And so it could just be bringing together a lot of these groups and then attending meetings and then insisting on action and integration. And I'll just finish with the example of listening and doing. So this reads, and I'm just quoting from the report for this one. Transparent and inclusive community engagement and education to understand our community's priorities and values, inform decision-making, and help our community take meaningful action towards a more sustainable future. And so it sounds nice, and how does that play out, and how do they deliver such promises? And through mature and embedding water literacy approach within our community. And I have a resource at the end that has the water literacy campaign that Hunter Water actually worked with indigenous communities and artists, and again with school groups to promote water literacy in an environment or context of water scarcity, and establishing a community committee to review progress on customer outcomes and community involvement and input on future priorities. And just the next slide, please. So you'll have resources for all of the presentations and from all the presenters, and these are just a few of them, and I just wanted to flag so there's even like a good report that I reviewed before this, but since we have limited time, I just wanted to share the title, but protecting local water utilities from privatization. That's specific to this Hunter Valley region. So even though it's a publicly owned utility, that there still are politicians that are trying to privatize it, and this is a legal document from the state government. Just specifically on that topic of ensuring the longevity of the public ownership of Hunter Water, and they also divide the area. So, for example, the Lower Hunter and Upper Hunter have different water security plans, which makes a lot of sense, and how those are coordinated then with land use planning decisions, and so there could be some transferable lessons here, and you can just look through the documents and maybe get some ideas. And I just had a great time working with this community, and I thought that we thought that this could be just a fun example to look at, on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. But it's nice, yeah.
What percentage of the Hunter project were Aboriginal people?
What yeah.
Percentage of the people were being served?
So my understanding, and I'm not speaking again for Hunter Water. Actually, frankly, I'm not able to answer that. So, like, when we were working, because I just don't want to give an incorrect answer. But so again, the population was of customers was around 530,000, and there were 6 to 7 indigenous groups that were recognized, but I couldn't say a percentage of. I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
In supporting what are the next steps with the ideas that have been surfaced in this room, and we're happy to take your questions, and otherwise I'd invite Gina to close us out with a closing reflection. Yes.
What are your plans for taking information you're getting this week in terms of taking the next steps of getting people of East Maui, Upcountry, et cetera, working together to solve the problem?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. The original intent coming out was really to start the basis of our watershed management plan. And we figured while we're out talking about the watershed, especially Upcountry here, who are the users, we would also just get your perspective, and we'll start folding it into some of our documents. And also, we'll start sharing your perspective with the rest of the community. We have Akaku here who's filming it, so we can put that out for people to see, and we'll start sharing it with policymakers. So, and I hope to keep coming back to the community association and also the board.
We wrote a wonderful letter that covered the waterfront about the storage tanks. And I'm hoping that that letter doesn't get stuck on somebody's desk or worse, and that it actually is processed and looked at and discussed, and we can,
Is that your fire mitigation letter that you wrote? To the state about fire mitigation.
to the state, to the council, and to the mayor, of course. We covered the waterfront with it.
Okay.
So we're hoping that it's great. It's a wonderful presentation of a very important aspect of what we need.
I'd love to see it, and I'd love for our board to see it too. So if you can send it to me, I can pass it on to the board. Go.
Recommendation, you have the East Maui watershed started looking at the water, the source of the water in East Maui. It would, I think, be useful to have a committee, similarly, informal perhaps, of the water users, the Mahitono, the various country communities, and maybe the agricultural interests and Hawaiian homelands. If you could put together like 2 or 3 people, with each of those 3 or 4 or 5 bodies, that would be able to meet, discuss the needs
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. The DLNR has put together, mandated as part of the annual permit, a stakeholder group, an East Maui stakeholder group. And this last December, they asked the county to take it over. It does not include the water users. I would like, when we go back to the BLNR, to ask to have that group added as a stakeholder to that group. And that group meets monthly. And we discuss various issues affecting the water license, but often that is the same issues that we deal with here in the county too. So that's a great idea, Dick. Thank you.
I'm not sure you need this DLNR, but I think your East Maui Water Authority can ask, since you're working with the water and where it's going, you'll want to see what kind of demand there is for their the water.
Yeah, we could add a third group. Right now, I need a little more staff to, but if I could fold them into what we're already doing, it would make it a little bit easier.
I think that's a great starting point, the public initiative. I mean, it creates, in my opinion, a great structure and parameters within that structure to move forward. I mean, listening to this is very comprehensive. And I think it's great.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We want to do information out and information in too. So we're really new. We're working. We're small, but we're mighty. We did just increase. So we hope to come back out and find new ways to engage with you too, because we're learning. So I hope to have a presence again up here. The Kula Community Association, it's so great that you have an association that's already there, very effective too. But if there's other ways I can get out and listen to the other community. We're going to haiku tomorrow night too. So. Oh, thank you. That means a lot to me. So I want to thank the Kula Community Association for partnering with us on this. I'm really grateful. I think we had Jordan here, the president, earlier. Anybody that's a board member or former member, if you want to just raise your hand or stand up. I mean, yeah, my heart really goes out to all the work you folks do. Thank you. Any other closing comments from anybody? Or?
Well, it's all about water, but it's all about food. So when we are dismissing, please help yourself to whatever you want. And thank you, folks.
That was quick. Thanks. You want anything? Okay, everybody, thank you again. I hope to see you soon. Keep inviting me back. Thanks.